Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the podcast today. This is obviously a tough day for many of us, September 11th. It feels like yesterday, and I just want to take a moment to recognize what happened on September 11th and really just appreciate everything that the first responders and everyone did that day. We have changed so much as a country since then in so many ways, and it never fails to hit me on September 11th how much we lost that day, how much the world lost that day. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. We're going to be talking about social media investigations. And it's not really an investigation, but we've had not an investigation the way we normally talk about them, like a neutral investigation of a workplace complaint. But we have had a number of clients recently who want to really investigate, review, check up on candidates by doing social media checks. And so there are a lot of companies, of course, that do background checks where they check on the criminal history. They look at employment history. They look at whether somebody actually went to the university they said they went to. But social media investigations are a little bit different. And many companies don't offer the service because many employers just do it themselves. They do it more informally, where they actually look at Google and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, and they see what they can find out about these potential candidates. Or they see what they can find out about current employees where there's been an issue that has been raised and they want to do some digging around. We're going to talk about the hiring part of it this morning because what's interesting to me is we have a lot of rules, obviously, in this country, not just California. We have a lot of rules about what information is appropriate for us to consider, right? Criminal history information is a perfect example. There are very specific prohibitions on asking about criminal history until you've made someone an offer of employment. So it's called post-offer pre-employment. Then you can start asking some questions. And of course, many of us conduct background checks with a third party. There are all sorts of notices and disclosures that have to be provided as part of that process. There are many fewer, in fact, none, in terms of restrictions on social media when you're actually looking at the social media, okay? So you're allowed to go on Facebook anytime you want and do a search, right? You can search somebody's name, you can search somebody's job title, whatever. Same with Instagram, same with TikTok, all of the social media apps or platforms. What doesn't change with social media is how you can use the information. So when you have a manager who's interviewing for an opening just decide to do a little sleuthing on the computer and see what they find on social media, many, many times they will find information that cannot be properly used to make a decision. For example, I have a client, one of their managers, every time they interview someone, before they make an offer, they go look on the Megan's Law database, which tells them if the applicant, future employee, is a registered sex offender. Well, you're not allowed to do that because the law doesn't allow you to use the results of the Megan's Law database for employment purposes, except in very limited circumstances. So we often have, with this particular employer, the manager goes out, gets information, comes back and says, oops, so-and-so's on Megan's Law, I'm not going to hire them. Well, you can't do that. And the problem is now you know they're a registered sex offender. So you might decide that you're not going to hire them, but you now have a legal problem. Now, some people would say, well, Jen, it's worth it because at least I know they're a registered sex offender. Okay, but what does that really mean for the job, right? If you know anything about the Megan's Law database, people who, for example, streak at a football game may have to register as a sex offender because they had public nudity Does that necessarily mean you wouldn't want to hire that person? We know that the way the employment laws work, you can't just decide as a matter of course without investigating, without looking at the situation, that you won't hire them. You also can find out information about people's political beliefs, religious beliefs, all sorts of personal data. How many times they've been married, to whom they've been married, how many kids they have. All the sorts of things that we know we're not supposed to be asking about. And particularly right now when you're dealing with this political situation we have, where we've got a huge presidential election coming up and people in this country being very divided, I have clients who will go on to search for, all right, what's this person's political belief? Do they say anything about politics? Because I don't want to bring anybody in here who doesn't agree with me, who doesn't have my views, who doesn't share my perspectives. So one of the things that is really interesting about social media is all of the information that people are willing to share. And I find it so ironic when I receive a letter from some company that has had a data breach, right? And they tell me, oh, we're so sorry, we let all this information out. And I'm incensed. Like, how could you have done that? And I want to know what they're going to do to solve the problem. And are they going to put a hold or some sort of an alert on my account with the credit bureaus so that we can make sure that nobody's misusing my information? Yet I'll go on Facebook or Instagram and share something really important to me without ever giving it a second thought. So as an employer, when we are looking for information about applicants, it is really tempting to do those social media checks, right? To go and see what people have said. But I want you all to know the risk of it. And so many times we find out information that we legitimately cannot use. Again, that doesn't mean we won't use it. We may decide, okay, we weren't supposed to get the information this way. We did it anyway. That's just how it is. And we're not going to bring this person on. And I don't care. To heck with the law. If they want to sue me, let them sue me. That's fine. That's always your decision as the employer. But many times you also find out about things about people that aren't even true, right? You'll have folks who exaggerate on social media. We know that. I think I've told you guys my story, which is my best example of this. When Ella was about 6 or 7, we took a trip to Europe, and my mom and I and Ella got this great tour guide in the Riviera in the south of France who took us all over the place. And we kept seeing the same couple everywhere we went. And Ella actually noticed that the woman kept changing clothes. So we asked our tour guide, well, what is going on? And the guy was taking a bunch of pictures of her. So I thought she was a model or something. They were doing a photo shoot. He said, oh no, people do this all the time for their social media pages. They'll say they're in Europe for a month. They'll come over here for a week and they'll just have me drive them around and take them to a bunch of places. We'll take pictures and then they post it on their social media page as if they were out having all this vacation time, but they really didn't have any fun. They just took all these pictures in a 3-day period, right? None of that makes any sense to me. But if you're really connected to Facebook or Instagram and your image is important, I guess I can see what people might be doing, right? They're not necessarily going to tell the truth about what's going on. They're going to embellish it a little bit. So the information you're finding on social media may not even be accurate. So I think we have to look at the balance here and the pros and cons of really taking a step back and thinking, okay, do I really need that information? What am I going to find out through social media that is really going to help me make a decision about an applicant? And if there's something we want to know, like criminal background history, for example, there are ways to get that information more appropriately and to ensure that we're only getting the information we can actually use. Now, social media can be very helpful when you are looking at workplace issues. For example, somebody says they're homesick with a temperature of 102, and they just posted that they're at Folsom Lake here in Sacramento, at a beach party. Well, that's going to be a pretty helpful piece of information for you. So I'm not saying that social media can't be useful, can't be fun. I love scrolling through Instagram and looking at all the animals. We love going up to Yellowstone, so I love looking at the biologists who we work with every summer. They've got great pictures of bears and elk and just moose, and it's just amazing. So I love scrolling through to see those. And, everybody has their own favorite platform, their own favorite things that they do with social media. But as an employer, we have to be really careful about the information that we're using. And certainly when it comes to hiring, when you consider that the Civil Rights Department and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission have very specific rules and regulations about what information is appropriate for us to ask during interviews, right? We don't ask, what is your religious belief? Do you have children? How long have you been married? Do you have a same-sex spouse? We don't ask any of those questions, obviously. But that's the kind of information you often have access to on social media. So a couple things I want you to think about. If your organization decides, listen, Jen, we get the risks of this, but we think doing a social media check is a good idea, then have the same person do the social media check each time. So have that be somebody's job for your applicants so that you can have a process and procedure. All right, what information was found? Are we going to have a team of people who are going to review it? Do we need to call employment counsel and make sure that we're not running afoul of any laws here? The more tightly prescribed you can make your process and who's involved in that process, the less potential risk you're going to have from a legal perspective. The other thing I want you to think about is your own unconscious bias, right? We've talked about bias and prejudice and stereotypes a lot on this podcast, and it's really important for all of us to understand that we have both conscious and unconscious biases. So for us to think about, when you go look at a post on social media, do you already have a preconceived idea about what you might find and what, if you do find it, that might mean in terms of that person being a good or, quote, bad employee? So we've all got those biases and prejudices. We all jump to conclusions sometimes. And, it's interesting. I read an article recently that explained prejudice and stereotypes as sort of our brain's way of being efficient rather than having to make a detailed sort of step-by-step assessment of what's going on in a particular situation. Our brain wants to take a shortcut and kind of lump everybody who looks the same or acts the same or worships the same, make them all sort of be the same, right? Because our brain is being efficient. That's an interesting explanation, but it doesn't change the fact that those stereotypes and biases and prejudices are really problematic in the workplace, and we've all got them. So if you're going to allow these social media checks as part of the hiring process, you've really got to help the person doing them with their unconscious biases and their conscious biases, right? What are they looking for? What are you looking for as an organization? What information is out there that the checker should really be ignoring, right? Just something that we don't want to be revealed. And that's an important gate, right? Because if the person who's doing the check knows, okay, I'm not going to report any information about somebody's religious belief or somebody's political belief, right? Really, I'm going to be reporting on whether they bragged that they stole some items from the local Rite Aid. Then I'm going to report that. If you have some guardrails in terms of the information they are reporting, then that means only the person who did that check is going to know that information. So that information can't be misused by the hiring committee, by the supervisor when they're doing an evaluation once that employee joins, etc. So if you're going to do it, if you're going to use social media as one of your sort of hiring criteria, right, as a process you're going to go through, make sure you've got some of those bumpers and guardrails up and that you're taking appropriate steps to make sure you are not relying on information that you shouldn't be relying on. I know it's tough hiring out there right now, everybody. I know it's tempting to use these resources, but just use a little caution out there. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's always an honor and a privilege. Go out and have a great day. Fall is almost here. I am so excited. So keep up the good work, everyone. I'll see you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.